Okay, so people will be joining us live on YouTube in some number.
Okay.
And then it'll be archived immediately afterwards.
Okay.
So, hold on, let me just make sure I sent the. I'm going to screw something up here.
Okay.
One moment.
Yep.
Okay, now we're good.
Okay.
In contemplating what I wanted to bring up with you, I cast my mind back to some exchanges that we had over Twitter in 2014. So this was the fall of 2014 when the presidential campaign was still in its very early stages. So you had your kind of shadow campaign happening on both sides, and it's called the invisible primary. I think that's kind of a cliche, but whatever. The kind of behind the scenes machinations were underway at that point.
Right.
It was pretty clear that Hillary Clinton was running for the Democratic nomination, and there was a desire among some people on the leftward plank of the punditocracy for a challenger to run against her in the Democratic primary. Whether they wanted the challenger to ultimately win, or whether they just wanted them to mount, a viable challenge to her, to strengthen her ultimately. There was this desire out there that she needed to have a substantive debate, and to do that, there had to be a competent, another competent Democrat running. And actually, I should disclose off the bat that Bernie Sanders was discussed in that context back during that time, and I was skeptical that he would gain any kind of traction, and I was dead wrong about that, and I'm glad to have been dead wrong about that because I ultimately supported him. But the reason why there was this sort of minor frenzy to find somebody viable to challenge her was because there was this thinking that she was vulnerable. Not just vulnerable, she had ethical problems. Bill Clinton, the former president, was going to be a liability for her in a whole variety of areas. She's very militaristic, very hawkish. She says she learned the lessons of the Iraq War, but nothing about her subsequent behavior really would demonstrate that, given that she supported every subsequent failed military intervention. So we could run down the litany of flaws with her, but I'm wondering, as far as you can recall, have the people who were really strenuously attempting to find somebody to challenge her, have they been vindicated at this point, given recent events? Or to what extent have they been vindicated or not, in your view?
Well, I think that clearly anybody should be challenged, no matter how much they're the presumed nominee, right? So it's not healthy for a political party to have a coronation rather than a contest for its leadership. So I think vindicated. I mean, sure. I mean, the space was obviously to her left, to like a kind of a more social democratic candidate domestically, and a more anti-interventionist candidate in terms of foreign policy. So you could imagine, Sanders, who seemed, I don't know what I was thinking about Sanders in November 14, but I probably would have thought, he's the most implausible one to win. He's it essentially been a radical gadfly from a small state. He's an old guy, an old Jewish guy. That didn't seem like, particularly plausible. But then there was also Elizabeth Warren, and there was also, at least potentially, if he'd been interested, Sherrod Brown. For starters, I mean, there could have been Jeff Merkley, I mean, you can imagine maybe one or two others. So, sure, I mean, they're vindicated in the sense that, yeah, she deserved the challenge. It was probably essential that she have a challenge. And regarding like her vulnerabilities, that's a different issue than her politics. Her politics, I think right around that time that you're talking about, and in 2014, I wrote a little thing in The Nation about her. There were like 5 or 6 of us who did. I don't know. Hemwood was one. Steve Tellis, and I called her I think I called her a corporate boardroom liberal, which was just a variation, I guess, on a technocratic liberal. And that's about right. But then she got leveraged to the left by a left challenge. So that all totally made sense. The thing about her vulnerabilities, and I think what people probably didn't anticipate, was that there was something new that could trip her up. I mean, the line was, well, she's been so heavily vetted, the American people are so used to her, what could possibly come up? And basically what came up was emails. When you look at the surveys, when the email story broke, when the Times broke it, laugh out loud, the liberal media somehow decided to, this is, a paradox or a perversity that the right wing can't sort of grapple with. But the flagship of the liberal media, the New York Times, actually broke the story that if she is to lose, that will be essentially the reason why. That story, that her numbers immediately went down, her favorability numbers following the that story. They went below 50% and they never got back up to it.
Yeah, let me just interject there. I mean, and I want you to continue on this line of thinking. But so the New York Times broke the email server story in March of 2015.
Right.
I think it was March 2nd.
Right.
And she didn't formally announce her campaign until April of 2015. So this was broken when everybody just assumed that she was running, and they kind of were toying with the media and not formally announcing it yet, but everybody pretty much knew. But nonetheless, even with this major, so even when the New York Times first broke the story, it was readily apparent to anybody who was honestly assessing it that it would be a major liability for her. Whether or not you agree that it's on the merits, something that was ethically wrong, so bracketing that, it was always obvious that it would be at the very least a political liability for her. And nonetheless, you had the entire kind of pro-Clinton liberal media apparatus, and I don't say liberal media to encompass all the media, as the right wing might. I'm saying the liberal media in the sense of liberal opinion journals, liberal websites, outlets with a obviously liberal bent to them, not just like the New York Times or NPR. No. So there's liberal organs in concert with what I would say are propaganda outfits like Media Matters and Think Progress. They launched a ferocious effort to spin the email story as what they called a nothing burger. So that was the juvenile kind of term that they wanted to assign to it, right? Mm-hmm. So because they did that, and that was basically became accepted wisdom, it was never litigated over the course of the Democratic primary, really. I mean, Bernie Sanders infamously said, "Who gives a damn about the emails?" This stuff wasn't aired in the context of the Democratic primary, right. and that's why the impact of it is now amplified, because it has sort of it has this impression of newness or being revelatory, when really it's been going on for a long time. It's just that there was this furious propaganda effort to downplay its significance by the liberal media organs. I mean, she was under criminal investigation beginning in July of 2015. So at the very early stage of the Democratic primary. So my point had always been, and I was called the conspiracy theorist for this, and just I was called trying to help the right wing by pointing this out. But my point was always this needs to be taken seriously, if only on a purely political electoral level. I don't know. Does that ring true to you as what has happened?
Yeah, you're right. Essentially, what you saw was the approval numbers go down and the honesty and the trustworthy numbers go down. And this was long before, obviously, the crooked Hillary and all of Trump's nonsense kicked in. And then, yes, very important to underscore that the opposition candidate, for his own idiosyncratic reasons, decided he wasn't going to run on this, meaning the emails, but he would more broadly discuss the speeches, the Goldman Sachs, the other investment banks, whether she's in the pocket of Wall Street, et cetera, but nothing else. Actually, people don't kind of connect that to her. The only thing that comes up, like in those word bubbles that some of the survey companies use, Goldman Sachs doesn't come up, speeches doesn't come up, even the Clinton Foundation doesn't come up. There's a great deal of news about that. But this was a story that people, intuitively thought, even without much detail. You had email server, Secretary of State, private email server, so that didn't work for people, regardless of whether Colin Powell, right, regardless of the merits. And then FBI. So it was kind of like security, private, FBI, Hillary Clinton. And that frame has been enough to essentially make her the equal of, the most malignant presidential candidate in modern American history.
As of so it's for the past couple months, Trump and Hillary have rivaled one another in terms of unpopularity. Trump is often popular, but at various points, Hillary has actually been equally unpopular to Trump.
Yeah, that's right.
And we're back now at that point, according to the ABC Washington Post poll that came out either yesterday or the day before, where Trump is actually less unpopular than Hillary. It's only by 1 or 2 percentage points, so it's within the margin of error, but still. So my question to you is, I want to drill down on this point in particular. Those liberal media outlets and those pro-Clinton media entities, based in D.C., affiliated with the Center for American Progress, et cetera, they were at the forefront in trying to discourage any liberal or progressive or left-wing bent to take this email server story seriously, whether on the merits or on the political realm. I happen to think on the merits there was actually something substantive to it as well, but even just purely from an electoral standpoint, they were leading the charge every day in, day out, for a year and a half now. Spinning this as a nothing burger. So to what and saying that anybody who would raise it is a right winger. So to what extent are they implicated in this?
Well, 2 points. First of all, we find out from WikiLeaks that the woman who runs Center for American Progress, Neera Tanden, was, behind the scenes saying, wow, boy, Hillary really screwed this up. Apparently, somebody that she's supposedly very, very close to. So Tanden didn't think that this was a nothing burger. Tanden understood clearly that it was serious. And presumably she had some influence. I don't know. But then, so go back to that point. Okay, the story breaks, and you work for one of these. Not you. One works for one of these center left outfits, right? One of these kind of like agitprop outfits for the sort of core of the Democratic Party. So how do you approach a story like that? I mean, usually what advocates do, what advocate organizations do, what partisans do is when, you know, a candidate is attacked, in this case, you know, right, she hadn't announced she was running yet, but she was clearly the overwhelming favorite to be the nominee. What they do is they try to diminish the charge. I mean, I'm not quite sure what they would have been expected to do besides what they did do, because that's what agitprop organizations do, right? If things are going well, they pump up the stuff that's going well, probably beyond its intrinsic merits. If something bad happens, they try to diminish it.
Here's what they would have been expected to do. I mean, if they weren't, here's what they would have been expected to do, right? And yeah, they are agitprop organizations, so you don't really assume them to be acting in good faith. But you know, what they could have been expected to do was not just operate on the assumption that Hillary was the overwhelming favorite to win. I mean, maybe she was, but they acted as if she was already the preordained nominee, so any bad news had to be seized upon and spun into as a nothing burger. Whereas they didn't do that on behalf of Bernie Sanders. I mean, they did, when something negative about Bernie Sanders would surface, they wouldn't launch this all-out initiative to explain to their readership why it wasn't true. And they could have been expected not to just lie. I mean, they lied constantly about this email server investigation. They attacked the New York Times. You can go and look at this guy Eric Bollert's writings and tweets from the summer of 2015.
Right.
And the New York Times in July 2015 broke that a criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton had commenced. And they were totally vindicated about that a year later when the FBI's internal documentation came out, and the FBI themselves stated that Hillary was, the purpose of the email server investigation was to assess whether Hillary Clinton herself had committed violations of felony statutes. So that is a criminal investigation in the purest sense. But these organizations would say, no, it's not a criminal organization. I mean, it's not a criminal investigation. They would deny. They would just be untruthful.
Look, I don't work for these guys. You know, I mean,
no, but there's always this emphasis on the right wing spin machine and what kind of detrimental impact that has on the Republican coalition. But here we have a perfect analog on the left, and you don't have anywhere near as much criticism.
A perfect analog.
Not a perfect analog, but a plausible analog.
It's hard to call a perfect analog because it's a big discrete episode, but it's just one discrete episode. It's one story, right? So, right, she was the candidate of obviously Center for American Progress and whatever their spin-offs are, and obviously anything David Brock has to do with, right. She was the overwhelming favorite. She was getting whatever, 65% or whatever of Democratic support then. Bernie, he didn't announce till what, June or July, right? Wasn't even clear at that point whether she would have anybody run against her, right? As absurd as that would have been. So again, thinking about it from their point of view, beginning in March, they're looking at what might be the only candidate that's going to run, let alone, yes, of course, the candidate exactly who they wanted to run, the one who would just miss last time, the one who would be another first in American history, breaking the gender barrier, the way Barack Obama broke the race barrier. I mean, yeah. So you're right. They didn't actually, without fear or favor, obviously, think this thing through. I mean,
but the reason at that point that it looked like she might be the only candidate or the only semi-viable candidate to run was because people in those sorts of positions who exert influence over the Democratic coalition, had decided before the campaign even began that she was going to be the nominee. You had Biden. Biden obviously had some interest in running. He tested the waters. Elizabeth Warren was open to being courted. She could have feasibly ran if she wasn't crowded out. You had other.
Fairness, she didn't seem to have her heart in. Okay, yeah, I mean.
Well, but neither did. I mean, Bernie wasn't somebody who his entire life was dreaming of running for president. Circumstances shifted such that it seemed, like a tenable thing for him to run. So I think, if Warren were presented with the right incentives, she could have been persuaded to run. But the reason she did it was because you had entities like the Center for American Progress and all these other kind of related organs, predetermined who they wanted to be the nominee. That it's not as if it just kind of the situation just kind of materialized out of thin air.
No, but it's but Mark, right? It's tautological, right? I mean, the elite, the powers that be within the party wanted the establishment of the party wanted the establishment candidate to be the nominee, right? I mean, she was the center left establishment candidate, not nearly as
well. She said she was center right. She said she was center right.
She said, I'm sorry. At what point? I mean, okay. I mean,
she said at a fundraiser in February, that the audio of which was subsequently leaked and published by The Intercept. She characterized herself as center right in that fundraiser.
Okay.
Just for the record.
Okay, but then other times, obviously, when she was being pressed by Bernie, she tried to, make a point about her progressive bona fides. So she's a politician.
Because she has a private position and a public position. She said that. This is why people don't trust her.
They all do. They all do. You ever read about Lincoln or FDR?
I mean, they all do to some degree, but not to her kind of pathological degree. You think Bernie Sanders has views that in private that wildly diverge from his views in public?
I don't know about wildly diverge. I mean, FDR was like playing people, Republicans, Democrats, Huey Long, the Southern white supremacist bloc. I mean, he was playing off all of them and saying one thing to them in private and saying other things in public. I mean, come on. I mean, you might. In fact, it's fair to say that FDR was a manipulative guy, a charmer, and a guy who played a lot of different angles. Depending on how you feel about that, he's either a pathological dysfunctional person or like a brilliant politician. It kind of depends on what you think about where his instrumentalism led the country. So I mean,
but the difference is, so let's say that FDR and LBJ and Hillary are all kind of roughly comparable in terms of the way that they portray things in private, diverging from the way they portray things in public. FDR and LBJ all did that. And again, I don't necessarily accept the comparison as accurate, but let's just grant it as accurate. FDR did that in service of implementing a far-reaching social democratic agenda, right? But there's nothing that Hillary stands for that even comes close to that level of reform. So you kind of get the worst of both worlds with Hillary. You get the duplicity, and then you also get the kind of nothing burger ideological positioning. So it's not clear that her deception is in the service of anything desirable. It's just in service of accruing as much power to her as possible and to Bill.
I mean, 2 points, right? I mean, one is
it's Michael. Just so you recall.
What's that? I mean, one we don't.
It's Michael, not Mark. Just to clarify.
Okay. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I forgive you.
I was thinking of, there is a Mark Tracy, and I was thinking of him.
I know, I've been confused with him like several dozen times. It's pretty crazy.
No,
Anyway, go on.
No, my apologies. Well, we don't know yet, right? So we'll see. Because she's not president. In fact, for all we know, she may not even become president. So we'll see. B, Roosevelt wasn't even interested in supporting the Wagner Act. In fact, he didn't. You know, he had to be kicked in the ass by like the biggest, you know, one of the biggest years of mass disruption and strikes in American history, 1934, to finally get behind the bill. Because he didn't support it in 1934, it didn't pass. I mean, he famously ran on a balanced budget in 1932. So, you know, it's not like he was some public policy wonk, right? You know, I mean, what you would expect from a malleable politician is that a malleable politician can be moved to the left. That's what it appears that the Sanders campaign did with her. We won't know how far to the left until or unless she's elected. And then that's also a dynamic situation, right? Because
then a malleable
won't stop pushing her to the left. So we'll see what they actually do after she's elected too.
And and the Clintons were equally malleable in the 90s, right? And they were pushed to the right. So
right, but that's
does that give anyone confidence in? This is why people don't trust them.
No, but history has changed. That's the difference is that Robert Rubin is no longer the leverage point in the Democratic Party. Elizabeth Warren is. I mean, this is what I keep saying to people on the left. You know, which I kind of think I have a foot in, but they don't give themselves enough credit. I mean, from Occupy going forward, from Occupy, Fight for 15, Black Lives Matter, the Sanders campaign, the Walmart demonstrations, the axis of the Democratic Party has moved to the left. So yeah, I don't think that in fact the situation is analogous to the mid-90s because history has changed. I mean, you might as well say that it's really the same thing about FDR. You might as well say that if there had been movements on the right, maybe he would have moved to the right. Maybe. He had no particular affinity for labor unions. So maybe he would have moved to the right too. We're talking about massive structural power relationships here, right? So I think the power's moved to the left, and I think that's where she's going to feel the heat. Now, we can have a conversation again in 2 or 4 years, and maybe I'm wrong, but that's my best guess at the moment.
You know, something that's always bugged me about this formulation that posits that she has somehow moved substantially to the left as a result of the pressure exerted on her by the Sanders campaign and the energy that galvanized is the formulation always excludes foreign policy totally.
No, that's fair.
That's never mentioned in this notion that she's moved to the left.
No,
so
totally.
Even during the during the period of Democratic National, all this trumpeting about how the platform was the most progressive in history. First of all, that was just a talking point. I mean, you could go look at the 1972 platform, and that was probably more kind of left in the classical sense. But leaving that aside, none of the supposed progressive achievements that were touted had anything to do with foreign policy. If anything, the platform championed by that was crafted by Hillary's delegates inserted belligerent planks into the platform that hadn't been there previously.
No, I agree.
So maybe foreign policy isn't your top issue. That's fine. Everybody has different priorities.
No, I'm agreeing with you.
To totally exclude that, I don't think is reasonable.
No, I'm agreeing with you on that. But you also have to remember that is not entirely surprising. I mean, what do I have to do with it? It's not whether it's my top issue. I'm agreeing with you. It wasn't Bernie Sanders' top issue at all. I mean, he clearly is not interested in foreign policy, for better or for worse.
And I faulted him for that.
Yeah, fair enough. So, okay. So my point is the leverage candidate the opposition candidate didn't put leverage and opposition on in those areas. Little bit around Israel, but by and large, he didn't. It's just not his thing, right? And frankly,
the episode where he criticized Henry Kissinger, I mean, that was probably the best moment of the entire campaign.
Yeah,
so that was another instance of it. And he did bring up Libya here and there, but as you said, it was nowhere close to a theme for him.
Yeah. I mean, we agree on this. He's just not into it, and he doesn't have the policy chops on it. I mean, even Henry Kissinger was like, right, it was a vocative moment. It was a resonant moment. It's a name that, everybody knows, but it's also like it was going back 30 years. I mean, he didn't have the, he doesn't have the chops to talk about American foreign policy, and it's just not his thing. So, and, look, I don't know who that candidate would have been on her left on foreign policy, because look, it's not Elizabeth Warren's thing either. She knows as little or less than he does, and has as little or less interest in foreign policy.
Yeah, I had hoped it would be Jim Webb. I mean, I didn't think Jim Webb would necessarily win, but I thought he would at least be a voice on foreign policy who does have chops, who could have challenged her on the particular points with some mastery of the subject.
No, I agree. I mean, that actually would have been a very valuable intervention by him. Obviously, for various reasons, he couldn't get off the ground. But that would have been a very useful place for him in the process, and that didn't happen. So yeah, no, I agree with you. I mean, we don't know what we're going to get from her in foreign policy, and frankly, given separation of powers and the extreme probability that the Republicans will hold the House, and even a reasonable probability now that they'll hold the Senate. She's not going to get any bills passed, and on her. Anyway,
and she's going to be. I think she's going to be totally hobbled domestically by not just the Republicans controlling both houses of Congress potentially, but by them launching like five or six separate investigations.
Yeah.
So the email stuff is already going to be underway immediately, day one. The Clinton Foundation stuff is going to be there's going to be an investigation launched into that, and on and on and on. It's going to be like the 90s. I put it in a tweet this way a couple days ago. It's going to be like the 90s redux, but with no tech bubble.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with all that. Now, I will say, right, they've had it in for the Clintons, and they've been jousting with the Clintons for 25 years now, but the Democrats had nominated Sanders or Warren or Sherrod. I mean, they'd still be doing the same thing. That's who they are. They're an extremist major party formation. They're procedurally radical, not just ideologically radical. And this is what they do. I mean, they filibuster everything. They shut down the government. They fight about the debt ceiling. They leverage that. They don't do hearings on a Supreme Court justice. This is, they're a revanchist, dangerous, major party formation, and they would have done that with any Democrat. But having said that, it's going to be this Democrat, and I would expect, unless she is determined, and I hope she is, if she's elected, to really focus hard on executive orders. And to the extent it's possible, given that there might be a Republican Senate, really use the administrative power of the executive branch, whatever that is, whether it's the EPA, whether it's the NLRB, whether it's the SEC, whether it's the Treasury Department, regardless of who it is, to figure out as much leverage as she can legally do from the executive branch. Unless she does that, yeah, I mean, nothing's going to happen at all, which gets back to the foreign policy part, because that is the area, because Congress is, for various, long-run structural historical reasons, and Congress has abdicated its role in foreign policy with both Democratic and Republican presidents, liberal and conservative. That is the area where a president has enormous power. And right, we don't know. We don't know where she's going to be. on that.
And so if she's hobbled domestically by these investigations and by Republican control of Congress, then yeah, like you said, I can see her then being more inclined to assert herself on the world stage, and assert herself in quotes, which really in practice would mean initiating wars and bombing places. Remember in 2008, there was a big worry among her campaign, her failed campaign in that year, that she needed to be extra tough on fighting terrorists because, voters wouldn't trust this tenacity of a woman to be to go forcefully after America's enemies and so on and so forth. So she took the more hawkish position vis-a-vis Obama, right. and that didn't work. So I don't see any reason why that would cease to be the case. But on the point of the procedural extremism of the Republicans, I agree that that's just on its face true. The idea that they're just going to decline to give a hearing to a Supreme Court justice for, and somebody floated, wasn't it Senator Burr from North Carolina floated yesterday, but they might wait 4 years after Hillary's out.
Why not? Right. There's no constitutional requirement for 9 justices, right? So
yeah, so that's just crazy, and I agree that that's procedural extremism. And the idea that's conservative somehow, is ridiculous. Right. Conservative would be fidelity to the preservation of institutions, and that's just blowing up the institution.
Right.
But at the same time, you have this extremism in terms of the Republicans, but and they would have went after any Democrat. We saw. There was a hope in the early stages of the Obama term that because he had a broad mandate and because he was approved of by something like 65% or even greater, when he first took office, maybe Republicans would kind of budge and let him implement his agenda, but they united against him. So that's not. So they would very foreseeably do it against another Democrat. But the thing with Hillary is that she gives them much more material than any other Democrat would have, and much of the material is legitimate material. So you need a party to exert oversight. So in other words, Congress is rightly accorded the responsibility to exercise oversight. So
nobody else can do it.
Yeah, right. So Republicans might be crazy as a whole, but they're still the opposition, the duly constituted opposition. So they need to exercise oversight, and for her to give them so much legitimate material means that it's going to be conflated with the crazy stuff, and it's going to be impossible to actually exercise the oversight that is needed. You've seen this even recently when with the Chaffetz committee on House on oversight. So actually, the Chaffetz committee, at least in its public hearings, and so it's brought Comey before the committee and other people associated with the FBI investigation, and they've over the course of those hearings, they've ferreted out some really useful material about the workings of the federal law enforcement apparatus. But then it's reflexively dismissed as just more Republican gamesmanship, as we've seen for 25 years. So it's just kind of it's a mess of conflation, I feel.
Yeah, well, that's the difficulty, right? because the only way that this kind of separation of powers and oversight works if there's some kind of assumption of shared norms and good faith, as corny and namby-pamby as that sounds, on both sides. So you're right. Once one party just, and it's not like the Dems have never done their procedural tricks either. But once the R's have gone way past that, it's the same thing. I see this happen on Twitter every day. I get into these idiotic pissing matches where somebody makes an argument and it's dismissed based on who they are rather than the content of the argument, which we all do, right? Because we think, this is our tribe, this is a person that's a validator for me. He or she must be saying something smart. This person sucks. This person's a right-wing hack or a neoliberal shill. I'm actually not going to read the words on the page. and actually see whether they've actually made an argument or not. We all do it. We should try to be conscious of not doing it. So maybe we do it a little less and actually engage on the merits of what people are saying. But to your point, if the R's, like investigate everything just because they're procedurally radical and hyper-partisan, and 90% of it's bullshit, then even centrists aren't going to take seriously the 10% that isn't bullshit, because they've lost their credibility. That's why it's so important to somehow sustain these norms. But they're not going to be believed. So you're right.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna get the latest incarnation of this vast right-wing conspiracy line that Hillary kind of conjured up in the '90s with the assistance of Sidney Blumenthal, who's now back. And she's gonna just reiterate that. It's not gonna be the same phraseology, but it's gonna be just say, oh, here it's the cynical, awful Republicans again coming after me, just like they have for the past 3 decades, and that's it. My question has always been, did this fast right-wing conspiracy just take a vacation for 8 years under the Obama administration? Why didn't they find anything legitimate on him for 8 years?
Well,
they tried to, but they couldn't find anything. So maybe there really is a qualitative difference in terms of the ethical, the ethics of the Clintons versus Obama.
Well, let's see. I mean, it would be a waste of our time and our, our vast viewership here if we sort of went through on the merits everything that's connected with Hillary, and then try to parse out how much of what Bill is connected to should,
Hey, don't belittle our viewers. We love our viewers.
No, they're the best. I'm sure they're the best viewers on YouTube. I mean,
they're tremendous.
Yeah. No, I know. I know. That's kind of anti-democratic, small d on my part. So apologies to our viewers. But yeah, look, there may be stuff there. A lot of stuff, I think, is hot air. I mean, some is going to be real. Some of the stuff about her really is like, it's perverse how intense it is. Like, did you see this thing today? I'm trying to think what state it was from. Was it North Carolina or Texas, where some party official, GOP party official, was quoted in a document calling Hillary Clinton a cunt. That's just obviously blatant, repugnant misogyny, but also like the level of hostility. I mean, if you think, and I suppose many people do, you could say, oh, okay, you're right. She has no principles, as you were saying. So she's kind of like a neoliberal hack. She goes in the wind. But a CUNT, I mean, there's an intense anger about her, like disproportionate to who she is. I mean, again, my view is she's a standard pol. She cuts corners.
But there was intense anger toward Obama too. That was disproportionate to who he was. I mean, he was called. To me, the right wing conspiracy theories about Obama were a lot more odious than the right wing conspiracies about Hillary, because at least the conspiracies about Hillary are grounded in some semblance of fact, like she's corrupt or she's not trustworthy or she should be locked up. When they say lock her up, I mean that's a chant. It's not the most cordial chant, obviously, but I mean, at the same time, she was condemned by the FBI director for seemingly violating statutes, and to quote Comey. So, I mean, at least there's some basis there. Whereas with Obama, the big right-wing conspiracies were that he was a stealth jihadist who had infiltrated the White House to bring it down from within. So that was just totally bogus in every sense.
Yeah.
Bill
Ayers had written Obama's memoir.
Yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah. Look, I mean, all this stuff about Hillary sort of is balanced on, how much weight you put on the word, words like corrupt. I think she's a standard pol. She cuts some corners. I think if the social democratic left of the Democratic Party, like Sanders, Warren.
She's not standard, though. I mean, I just think that's a bogus defense for her. It's not standard.
No, hold on a second. Let me make my point. Like, if they see, right, this establishment Democratic piece of the party that comes out of Robert Rubin, even if Rubin isn't around and Rubinism has been dissipated, I get that they say, okay, there's a bunch of people like this who we oppose because we want to change the party and move it to the left and have it be more of a social democratic party. That's what I want too. That's my desire. I want it to be a social democratic party. So if you throw her in there with a bunch of other people and a bunch of like other kinds of establishment officials and entities or centrist officials, like I get that criticism. But the criticism that she is kind of uniquely malign, I think there is kind of something about that that's, like she's a witch or something,
But
it's too much. It's over the top.
I mean, yeah, some of it's going to be over the top because you have right-wing people whoever the Democratic nominee or president is, are going to proffer these ridiculous conspiracy theories. I mean, I think we've established that. But the idea that it's a defense of her to say that she's just run of the mill, a manifestation of just run of the mill corruption. First of all,
I said corner. She's a typical corner cutter.
Okay. But to marshal that line that you just uttered in defense of her, I don't think holds up to scrutiny. I mean, number one, it would be bad enough if she were run-of-the-mill. I mean, Obama gained traction because he presented himself as not run-of-the-mill in that sense in 2008.
So he is or not? Do you think he has unusual integrity, or don't you?
I think yeah, he does. Yeah, I think Obama has unusually great personal integrity. Doesn't mean I agree with everything he's done or feel that his ethics record has been flawless, but relative to other national politicians, I think yeah, he is a little bit above average in terms of ethics, adherence to ethics standards. And again, he's flouted a lot of that over the course of his administration. I'm saying what he ran on in 2008 was basically, I'm not going to be ethically compromised like the Clintons were. I mean, that was a fundamental message.
No, that's right.
But
1990s, and we're moving past that.
Right.
That's
right. Yeah, and he succeeded in that because there was no successful Republican investigation against him in Congress. I mean, you had stupid stuff like Fast and Furious and the IRS thing that never went anywhere. But the thing with the Clintons, oh God, I just lost my train of thought. What was I going to say? Damn it.
How can I help you?
It'll come back to me.
Clinton Foundation.
Okay. So here we go. So you said the idea that her corruption, quote unquote, is just run of the mill or standard. I don't think that is true. I think there's a reason why so many people across the spectrum. So you talk to people on the left, as I do very frequently. They don't view her as run of the mill corrupt. They view her as extraordinarily corrupt, so above average. So it's not just a right-wing thing; it's also a left-wing thing. And let me just finish the point. So it's not standard.
It's not just a right-wing thing.
But it's not standard, or it's not just cutting corners. Too, as Secretary of State, have in operation a vast, quasi-governmental foundation, quote unquote, that just conveniently employs all your cronies, and accepts millions and millions of dollars in donations from tyrannical foreign governments while you're the nation's top diplomat, some of which you don't disclose to the Obama administration, which you had brokered an agreement with to disclose the donations. So I mean, that's something that we've never seen before. That's not run of the mill. So I mean, that's just one example. So how's that run of the mill? That's crazy.
I would be more worried about the Clinton Foundation if there was actual proof that people got some quid for their quo. But what seems to
You,
have happened.
you know as well as I do that it's extraordinarily difficult to prove quid pro quo in the sense
You're
of
right.
getting in somebody's head.
You're right. But people give to, rich people give to charities, to foundations, for their ego, to be seen, to hang around with Bill Clinton.
Yeah, and their billionaire Canadian friend Gustra, he got all these. He used his leverage with the Clinton Foundation to gain access to markets the world over. So look at Colombia. I mean, there's a great report in Fusion a couple weeks ago by Ken Silverstein, actually doing the on the ground hard reporting of the Clinton Foundation's activities in Colombia, because everybody just intones over and over again, "We are not worthy. The good work of the Clinton Foundation is so fabulous. Good work, good work, good work." It's like a religious chant almost.
But look, I mean, maybe.
But none of it's ever corroborated with independent verification. So when Ken Silverstein actually goes to Colombia and investigates, he finds that it's an absolute disaster.
Look, I'm not, I'm not here to defend Hillary Clinton. Above and beyond the fact that she's a center-left Democratic politician, and
center-right in her own words.
Center-right, in those words, some days. Center-left when she's being leveraged by an opposition social democratic candidate, and then moves in the direction of that candidate. So I'm not going to go back and forth with you about the Clinton Foundation, which I'm not immersed in. I mean, you should interview Joe Conason, right? He's the guy who's up.
Yeah, but he's one of these agitprop types who've been spinning furiously for them for however long now.
Joe knows the
since
data.
the 90s.
Yeah, but Joe knows the data, right? I'm not going to go back and forth with you about that stuff. Well, basically, we're at an impasse here. I mean, you're saying she's worse than she's worse than normal. I'm saying she's sort of standard.
Okay, so let's leave that there. Let's move on to something about. Let's move on to Trump for a little bit.
Yeah.
So. The polls have very clearly tightened, and the trajectory of them is firmly in Trump's favor. So it seems pretty close at this point. I would say maybe Hillary's a slight favorite now, but it could just be a toss-up at this point. I don't know. You had, and so obviously, the fact that she's now under active FBI criminal investigation is just necessarily going to have an impact on her standing with voters, especially late deciders, quote unquote. So, and Trump seems to have expanded his the states that he's targeted to some more Democratic leaning states. So he's been in Michigan lately, in New Mexico, and Wisconsin, and a couple others. And even prior to the FBI announcement, it did seem as though the polling had tightened regardless.
Apparently it had moved already a couple of points before.
Yeah. So if Trump wins, right? So which is something we have to seriously contemplate now. And I had always said that his odds were greater than the pundit consensus had supposed, and I was called a crackpot for that. But it seems relatively true now. If Hillary Clinton were to lose to Trump, isn't she now wasn't she a national disgrace? I mean, isn't Clintonism permanently discredited by that? I mean,
well, this Clintonism. I mean,
or let's just say her personally. Isn't she permanently discredited as a disgrace?
Well, she's certainly discredited as a candidate who, presumably should have beaten, one of the most, a guy who's pernicious and malignant in so many ways, like an unbelievably ignorant, misogynist, racist, nativist, demagogic buffoon, right? A guy who knows nothing about public policy. He'll himself speak of corruption, a guy who appears to be corrupt up to his neck. I mean, disgrace. It's kind of like, I mean, I don't know. Are bad candidates, losing candidates, disgraced? Is the caucus disgraced? Is McGovern and Goldwater, Alf Landon, are they disgraced?
Well, I mean, I think losing to Trump would.
It would be like that. Sure. It would be like, wow.
Losing to Trump, I think, would be seen as a more severe blow than losing, than like John Kerry losing to George W. Bush in a tough re-election.
Well, it would also say something interesting about the whole efficacy of the professional election model, because one of the
so that would be salutary, right? I mean, Trump winning wouldn't be good, but I mean, putting all those hacks out of a job and kind of like undermining the premise of that industry, I think would be salutary.
Putting the hacks out of a job and breaking up the incestuous relationship between them and the mass media, particularly television, would be salutary. But there are other things that are supposedly assumed by political professionals to be really important if you're going to win a presidential candidate, like where your ad money goes and your get out the vote operation and your your fundraising, and she has, and the new stuff that the post 2008 kind of analytics where you like pinpoint exactly the kind of voter that's going to vote for your particular candidate, the 37-year-old African American Italian interested in ping pong and craft beers, I mean, all that kind of analytic stuff. I mean, she does all that stuff, right? I mean,
and that stuff was supposed to help Ted Cruz, remember?
Well, in fairness, it
probably did actually to some extent in Iowa.
Probably did. Finished second, right? And like with a terrible, a guy who, frankly, has, is a pretty oily kind of a guy, but And
actually, fun fact: Trump now employs or he's contracted with that same firm that helped Cruz in the primary, Cambridge Analytica or something it's called. It has that firm. Right. The background, the story behind that firm is itself weird. I mean, they're based in London or something, and I don't know. They collect a creepy amount of data.
Well, there you go. I mean, there's something to it. But having said that Trump is picking up a little of that. What we've heard for months is that Clinton is overwhelmingly advanced in that area versus Trump. Trump has all these conflicts with the RNC. Trump allegedly doesn't believe in get out the vote. Trump just goes by his own instinct. Clinton has a professional operation. She has get out the vote. She has her ad money goes to the right targeted places. Her analytics are, she took all the people from Obama's analytics operation and now she's got them. So having said all of that, if she doesn't win, that, I don't know whether that says more about the candidate or more about just those modes of operation. But presumably, like right now, let's just for argument's sake, I don't think this is probably true, at least the Nate Silvers and the upshots don't believe it's dead even. But let's say for argument's sake, it is dead even right now with a week to go. So you presume that the get out the vote operation is worth a point or two. So, if she doesn't win with all of these structural advantages in terms of the mode of her campaign, that would probably say something about, the fact that any old demagogue can actually blow off most of that stuff and win anyway. And it might, and yeah, in fairness, it would say something about, the quality of her as a candidate too. So
so I mean, and a lot of people make a lot of money on this industry in portraying themselves as having some kind of unique expertise on what it takes to win elections when they really are just spitting into the wind like most people. Right. Remember the Romney campaign in 2012 was a huge scam. I mean, you had all these people making a ton of money, getting money from rich donors and then they put together this get out the vote operation, and then if it failed on election day, remember?
Right.
So I mean, maybe the Democrats are a little more competent in that regard, but I mean, this entire industry is just like kind of premised on fraud.
Right. Yeah. No. I mean, the word corrupt is fair about the professional political industry. I mean, there's, like a lot of consultants, it's the old, they take your watch and then charge you to tell you how much, what time it is, So, I mean, there's a lot of corruption there, pretty clearly.
It's just, the Clinton people have always said, their get out the operation is just going to be so incredible that it doesn't matter that people loathe her. And I don't think that's true. I mean, Obama's get out the vote operation because there were actually people who wanted to get out to vote. I mean, so it wasn't. Well, yeah, it's not as if you can do. It's not like as if you can coerce people to go vote. They have to, in some sense, want to vote. And I'm actually in Jeffersonville, Ohio, at the moment, and I've been other places in Ohio over the past couple of days, and it's just amazing to me. So I was just in Columbus, and I saw no Hillary signs anywhere. I mean, I saw a couple, but if Hillary were to win Ohio, you'd have to see Columbus just bursting with enthusiasm for the Democratic nominee. Maybe not bursting, but you'd have to see something. And I don't want to use using yard signs is silly and anecdotal, but I mean, in talking to voters as well. I mean, I went to this. Obama was in Columbus today, doing a get out the vote rally.
Right.
And I just kind of randomly spoke to a couple people who happened to be standing by.
Right.
And these two young black men were there, and they said, yeah, they just came to check it out, right? And I said, yeah, I'm not going to vote for. I'm not voting for Hillary. So they're at an Obama rally. That's a Clinton-Kaine event. They said they would have voted for Obama if he was running for a third term, but they're not voting for Hillary.
Did they say why?
They think she's corrupt. When they're correct to think that. And then I was in Zanesville, Ohio, this morning, and I was speaking to. It was really a heart-wrenching conversation. It was a 20-year-old woman who has two children, two small children. She's estranged from her children's father. She's working two low-paying jobs. She said that she's told me that she is not eligible for Obamacare. So she sought out Obamacare and wasn't eligible. And maybe she wasn't doing it right or something. There was a communication error. I don't know exactly. But what she said to me was that she is not eligible for Obamacare. I didn't vet that claim. But just the fact that there's even if it's attributable to some communication error, that in itself is significant. She said, she's not voting for either of them. She would prefer Hillary, but she's not voting for either of them. She's voting for Gary Johnson. Now, why is she voting for Gary Johnson? Because of the drug policy issue. She doesn't want her or her friends to get locked up for marijuana. That's perfectly reasonable. I mean, yeah. And Hillary could have done a very simple thing. She could have followed Bernie's lead and just endorsed marijuana legalization, and she would have upped the youth vote by a couple percentage points at least, but she refused to do it.
You know what? Either of them could have done it. Trump could have done it too.
Yeah, Trump could have done it as well.
I mean, I actually think.
Just finish about this woman. She said, "You know who I would have really loved to vote for? Bernie." I said, "Really? Okay. Did you vote? Did you support Bernie during the primary?" She said, "Yeah." She went to a rally for Bernie. She voted for Bernie in the Ohio Democratic primary. She loved Bernie, right? So she came of age in the image of Bernie. She's only 20 years old, so she didn't really know Obama when he ran, right? But now, I mean, these people they view Hillary as roughly comparable to Trump in terms of corruption and the threat that she poses. And this hasn't been reckoned with. I mean, you might not feel that way, but a lot of people do.
Well, it's not just, right. No doubt a lot of people do. A lot of people don't. I agree with you. I mean, sure. I was in North Carolina doing Get Out the Vote last couple of weeks before the 2008 election. Yeah, the enthusiasm for Obama was incredible in the African American community, and it was powerful. It was moving, and all you can say about get out the vote is if you can get someone to vote, the fact that they're ambivalent or less than 100% ardent doesn't matter, because if they vote for the same person that the ardent person votes for, their vote counts exactly the same. So, I mean, sure. So this will be a test for her to get out the vote, you know, to the extent to which she's not as compelling a candidate. She's not as attractive a candidate to a lot of people, whatever the reason is. There could be 20 different reasons. To that extent, you know, it's going to be their job to like get people to vote. You know, I mean,
yeah, and you know,
most candidates aren't, right? Was John Kerry? Was Mitt Romney? You know, most candidates are not, you know, sort of FDR, Reagan, JFK kind of Obama charismatic candidates. And the fact that this is the first woman, you know, somehow changes the dynamics in ways that we may not even totally understand.
Yeah, I mean, that's why a fallacy all along was this kind of smug assumption by the Clinton people that the Obama coalition would just kind of transfer seamlessly over to her, and she didn't have to do anything to earn it. I mean, maybe they just thought it would be kind of like automatic that she would get the Obama kind of coalition behind her. And that was always just wrong. I mean, I was in 2008. I did get out the vote and canvassing for Obama as well in North Philadelphia. So the white working class part of Philadelphia, or one of the white working class parts of Philadelphia, that's where the campaign sent me. I don't know why exactly. So I wasn't interfacing with the black voters as much, although somewhat. I was interfacing with these, you know, low, downscale whites, quote unquote, as they're now termed, and I didn't get any. There was nothing like the hostility to Obama among that demographic that there is now toward Hillary. So to me, that should kind of like countervail certain assumptions people have. So they're okay with the black, you know, slightly more progressive Democrat. His middle name was Hussein, but they don't like Hillary. Does that have to do with some flaw with them, or maybe there's a genuine distinction between the candidates? I mean, that can also play into why it looks like Trump is going to win the 2nd congressional district of Maine, which is these same types of voters predominantly.
Yeah, no, that's the LePage country, and yeah, I mean, look, it may not be their fault. I mean, I will say there's a lot of men who have issues with Clinton. My example of the Republican official, you know, calling her a cunt just today. I mean, the issues of misogyny are. Yeah,
I mean, obviously that's absurd and repulsive.
Yeah, right.
So.
Right. No one's endorsing that, but I'm just saying there is some kind of a electoral trauma attending to the fact that the first woman candidate is running this time. And yes, that woman candidate happens to be Hillary Clinton, who has this long history of pissing off various people, of generating mistrust, of whatever it is, whatever kinds of having people project stuff onto her, whatever you want to, whether you want to defend her or oppose her, there's a long, fraught history here. So that, you know, that is going to affect the electorate. I mean, there's no question about it. Now, you know, presumably she's also getting more women to vote for her for a lot of reasons, a lot of which may have to do with just the fact that Trump is a misogynist pig. So that's reasonable too. But you know, I never thought that, and I don't know this for a fact one way or the other. It's not like I have any inside information. I never thought that. Having said that, I never thought that the Clinton team thought that the Obama coalition would just seamlessly be grafted onto her. I just thought that was their strategy to reconsolidate that coalition. In other words, well, yes, these are the voters that if we get them again to vote for the Democratic nominee, meaning this time us, will be elected, because it's a slightly when you divide the country between the Republican and the Democratic coalition in a presidential year, the Democratic coalition should be slightly larger assuming the Dem gets 80% of the non-white vote and gets, in the high 30s or 40% of the white vote. Should be a little larger. But I don't know if they took it for granted. I just think they thought that, well, this is what we need to do. Now, we're going to find out on Tuesday whether they've done it or not.
Yeah, and there was a poll that I saw a couple of weeks ago showing that the level of interest that black voters specifically have in this election versus 2012 has decreased something like 18% or 20%.
Yeah, that makes sense, right?
Yeah. So let's actually, I said that let's transition to Trump, and we didn't really do that. But so let's focus a little more thoroughgoingly on Trump, and then we'll wrap up in a little bit. So I have a pretty direct and maybe jarring question for you I can pose pretty succinctly.
Okay.
And it is this: is Trump a fascist?
No, I mean, my view is he's not a fascist. I mean, in part you get into historiography and scholarly definitions of fascism, but essentially, I don't see, Trump. There have been violence that isn't built like a private army. He doesn't. He has a cult of personality around him, but he doesn't. There's no sense in which the leader, the Führer, El Duce, is merging with the people. It's just that in this case, Trump, the El Duce of America, to be glib, is saying, I'm going to take care of it for all of you because I'm great. I'm Trump. I'm the greatest. So he's not sort of merging with the people as a fascist leader does in classic kind of early to mid 20th century fascist ideology in Europe. So no army, no merging with the people, no fascist coalitions in the past have been overwhelmingly young. There's been because there's a cult of youth around fascism. The young and the new. Well, obviously, Trump's coalition tilts old. No, I mean, he's bad enough. I think he's an authoritarian and a racist and a misogynist and a nativist.
And a nationalist.
I don't think he's what? I'm sorry.
And a nationalist. I mean, that's kind of the more apt term, I think.
And he's an ethno-nationalist, right? I don't think per se he's a fascist. If there were like sort of a Trump's army with like "Make America Great" insignias on their shirts, running around, not just in an occasional rally, but just sort of systematically beating the shit out of black people and Latinos, and anyone else they didn't like, and lefties. Then I might start to think he was a fascist. But right now, I don't think he's a fascist. And furthermore, he hasn't said. He says the system is broke, but he hasn't said that he's basically going to break himself. That he himself is going to break the rules of democracy, small L, liberal democracy. I mean, he's assuming he's going to be president. He says he's going to work with Paul Ryan or whoever, quote unquote, work with him. But in other words, he's not saying he's going to like move to abolish Congress, which are other kinds of, because the weight of fascism in the 1920s and 30s was that Parliament was that like European democracy itself was sick and corrupt, and the whole thing had to be smashed. Trump is just saying he's going to fix everything because he's Trump. He's not saying he's going to wreck everything. But that doesn't mean he's not incredibly dangerous. I think he's psychologically unstable. He's a narcissistic personality. He's obviously authoritarian. But I would not say he's a fascist, no.
Yeah, I basically agree with everything you just said there, which is why I think that it's been despicable. And I use that phrase, with seriously. It's been despicable for liberal commentators who will go unnamed here, but a certain breed of liberal commentators has just kind of casually thrown around this word fascism to describe Trump for a long time without reckoning with what that term really means. So, I mean, they don't. They've conflated fascism with, like you just said, an authoritarian sensibility, maybe a disregard for certain norms around liberal democracy. But to call him a fascist, I think, is just utterly uncalled for. But that's been a trope in these liberal commentary circles.
But
that's some of the leading figures. And again, I don't want to name them, but you would know who I'm talking about.
But there's a difference here between. To the extent
I can show you pieces since 2015, just with the headline saying Trump is a fascist or some variation of it, and I think that's incredibly irresponsible and despicable, and those people should be ashamed of themselves.
Right.
Because if that's what you really believe, if you really believe that he's a fascist, and let's say he's currently tied or he has a decent chance of winning, then I don't know. You should be organizing the resistance forces right as we speak, right? Or else you never really believed it.
Well, we'll hold that thought for a second. I would say, because, people have arguments about things like this. So I would say that there's one thing to sort of glibly, as you're saying, say, Trump is a fascist. Tweet something, write some brief incendiary Facebook page. It's another thing to write 2,000 or 2,500 words and make an argument. Yeah, here's just the way I tried to make an argument just now that I don't think he's a fascist. So I say, look, this is what I think. I think he's a fascist. You might be wrong, or people like you and in me might say, no, we disagree. We don't think he's a fascist, and here's why. But that doesn't mean that the argument is in bad faith. Being glib about it is not good, but being glib about anything that's complicated and important is not good, right? But I don't think
a lot of it has really been glib, and it's been egged on by people who just want to seed that idea into the discourse, so to say, without really substantiating it with argument. To the point that you'll have people there's this tweet by a writer on Saturday Night Live. I don't remember his name. This was like in August or something. And he was basically said that Trump is so dangerous that were he to win, he would construct extermination camps in the United States.
Yeah, well, that's right. Okay,
so that's the kind of glib stuff that germinates when you have these liberal commentators see the idea that he is a fascist. So,
right, but that's fatuous, not right. Fatuous, right? Or I think I misspelled it. But anyway, that's fatuous. That's banal.
No, that's the right spelling.
Okay, good. That's facile. But that doesn't mean that, and that's a Saturday Night Live writer, right? But that doesn't mean
But that guy has cultural influence.
No, sure. He does. But that doesn't mean that you can't write a serious essay arguing that you think Trump is a fascist. And then fine. So I'll disagree. I mean, ultimately, it's there isn't like some fascist good housekeeping seal, right? Where somebody gets stamped on their forehead. Okay, yeah, you're right. He actually is a fascist. See the stamp on his forehead, which is actually an unfortunate image, given the yellow star imagery of Jews. So I'm gonna stay away from stamps on the forehead here. But I'm saying it's not an unreasonable thing to cogently argue in an essay. I just don't happen to agree with it. I do agree with you that to say it glibly and to not think it through and to not have some kind of greater historical knowledge and context. Yeah, that's that.
Well,
that is superficial.
But there are a lot of people who have glibly propounded that notion. And so it's just a fact that has been glibly propounded, right? So that having been that having occurred,
Not everybody.
there is now, not everybody, but there is now a significant portion of people in the think-fluencing spheres and the electorate who genuinely do believe that he's a fascist. So were he to win, who knows what kind of reaction that will provoke, and you could trace a lot of that to this irresponsible, fear-mongering that a lot of the liberal pundits have done. So they've really done damage.
Well, I don't think he's a fascist, right? But I don't want to. As I said, but I don't want to test the proposition by seeing what he does after he wins. I mean,
no, but that's what's so infuriating. Like, you don't have to call him a fascist to construct a totally legitimate case about why he's dangerous. So why this overreach constantly? And you say it's the same thing with the Russia conspiracies. Like, there's plenty to saddle Trump without going to these extreme, unjustified lengths.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I think this is like a thing that, let's face it, this is a part of, and it actually has been for a long, long time. It's a part of American political culture. I mean, Adams and Jefferson were doing this to each other in the 1800 election. I mean, the New Left in the 1960s, wrote about America with a K. I mean, it wasn't, though. America in the 1960s wasn't fascist either. Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon, as bad as they were, as horrible wars they perpetrated in Southeast Asia, fascists. So there's a lot of this, the right wing and
it's just people who should have known better have done it. That's my point. Yeah, you're always going to get some hyperbole, but people with really significant platforms and who are seen as astute political commentators, they've done this. So that's I think that's what I object to.
Okay, but I'm not so down on people who wrote like serious essays about it. I am down on people who just threw the word around. But if somebody tries to make their case and brings up political and historical knowledge to the argument, then it's just, okay, you think he's a fascist, but look, I disagree with you. I mean, I think that we're just having a political argument, and that's democracy, right? If somebody just is tossing the word around without even buttressing their case, without even like sort of making an evidentiary argument, then I think that's correct.
Yeah, I do feel kind of obliged to offer a bit of countervailing evidence. So I don't think he's a fascist, but if I wanted to make the case, what was that?
I said I don't either. Right.
Right. So we agree on that. But if I wanted to formulate a case that he were a fascist, here's a piece of evidence that I would put forward that I think might actually contradict something that you just said a few minutes ago. Have you ever been to a Trump rally?
I have not.
Okay, well, I've been to many, in many different parts of the country now, and something that I've always been struck by is how well attended they are by young males, who tend to be the most rabid pro-Trump people, chanting, going crazy, laughing, etc. And I didn't go to quite as many Romney events.
Youth support there than I was giving it credit for.
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I think there is a little more youth support there than you gave it credit for. That doesn't mean it's fascist, but I just think empirically there is an enthused base of pro-Trump young men that could theoretically kind of band together and create some kind of paramilitary, squadron. I don't think that's likely to happen at all, but there is the manpower there potentially.
That's
And they want to be, and somebody I went to actually a Trump rally in Connecticut in August, and I noticed this and I tweeted about it, and some Trump person said, yeah, we want to be called red hats, not brown shirts, red hats. Maybe it was in jest, right? But they do have sort of iconography to kind of rally around, and who knows? So that would be a piece of countervailing evidence that I would put forward, and it's been really striking because I didn't go to quite as many Romney events in 2012, but they weren't nearly as populated, as far as I can recall, by young, enthusiastic males as the Trump rallies are.
Well, let's face it. I mean, there is a percentage of angry, young men are the most full of their testosterone, and they drink more, they drive more dangerously. I mean, these are just kind of actuarial, statistical norms that we understand.
And their brains aren't fully developed until age 26.
Right, and the brains aren't fully developed. And if they get themselves full of various rage, resentment against black people, brown people, women, gay people, who knows,
I should clarify. I mean, I don't think, in my observations of these people, I don't think they're all necessarily driven by anger. I think, or that's not, at least not the way that it manifests. I mean, they just love to be involved in this kind of big struggle, or they see it as like an adventure almost. And they find Trump hilarious. And I have to admit, occasionally I find him funny as well. Doesn't mean I'm going to vote for him, but he has humor as a potent weapon. Yeah. And so they love it as if they would like a comedy act. So it's like a stand-up comedy / political rally. So that's what they're into.
Yeah, sure. Okay, well that's an interesting take. Yeah, it's just kind of like they're going to a public event, they're kind of getting off on it. Right, this guy is like a performance artist, and they're enjoying it. Well, that hopefully might argue against them turning into some paramilitary group of armed thugs.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, maybe they're just kind of looking, this is like a fun time for them. Some people like to go to concerts, they like to go to a Trump rally and get jazzed on it.
Yeah, and it is sort of just objectively, it's an entertaining experience to be there. You're in a group of people who are having a good time, and they're like-minded, and they're getting involved in I guess collective effervescence is the sociological term. You go to a concert, right, because you want to be in this group atmosphere, and sort of be a single unit, in harmony with the people around you. It's the same thing applied to a Trump rally, but there's a political overtone.
Yeah. All right, now obviously we've seen darker overtones at Trump rallies too, people.
But that's been overstated. Man, that's why I wish you had attended one, because that's why I really despise the way the media has portrayed this. I mean, yeah, you do see that, and you can single out discrete instances of certain people acting badly. Mm-hmm. But I've now been to 7, I think, Trump events, and I've never seen You don't go there and get the sense that you're in the midst of this darkly fascistic atmosphere. It's pretty. I mean, people are basically kind. I mean, granted, I'm a white male, so it could be some people might experience it differently. But people are willing to talk. I mean, they're not it's not this dark affair, and the way that it's popularly portrayed in the media. I actually wrote a thing on the Daily Beast for this a couple, I guess now maybe over a month ago, but. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that's not a fair depiction of who they are, which is why I don't think it means that there's some kind of fascistic force brewing. I just brought up the point about these virile young men because hypothetically the manpower does exist. I just don't think they have enough of a unifying ideal to actually congeal into any kind of red hat force, so to say.
Well, that's probably true too. Nevertheless, without getting into that at this point, there are serious, profound concerns about, a Trump presidency. And
for sure. I mean,
yeah.
And that's why I don't argue. I mean, that's why I oppose Trump, thankfully.
Sure.
I actually contributed to a symposium that's going to be coming out this week in the American Conservative, where they ask contributors to just kind of briefly outline what they've done voting-wise, or what they will do voting-wise, and I lay out the case for why I've decided to consciously abstain this year. So that's my belief.
That's coming out this week. they had a bunch of contributors like across.
Yeah, they do it every 4 years. I mean, they kind of everybody that's in their orbit, they ask to submit 300 words and just kind of outline what they're doing voting wise. So that should be coming out, and that's that. I mean, there's a lot to fear with President Trump. I think there's a lot to fear with both candidates for different reasons, but there you have it. I guess that's a good place to wrap up. I think this was an edifying conversation.
Yeah, had fun. It was interesting. And,
any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think.
I'm not going to ask you to make a prediction about the Electoral College or anything, because I find that irritating.
No, I'll just say I don't. The one thing we didn't get into, and we've been going for a while, so the only final thought I'll have is I don't think there's any reason to think. We talked somewhat about the Democratic Party, but about the Republican Party as an institution, I don't think there's any reason to think the Republican Party is going to break apart. It's the most popular party in the country on the state level. It controls the majority of state governments. Obviously controls the House. There's probably a 50-50 chance now it retains control of the Senate, and will certainly have control of the Senate after the 2018 election, or almost certainly, where the map favors it. And the party can align itself if Clinton wins around opposition to Clinton, as it would to any Democratic president. And if Clinton loses, there's no reason to think that Trump won't sign pretty much everything that Paul Ryan sends to him. So
I actually don't quite agree with that. I think if Trump, I actually think if Hillary were to win, the Republican Party, just as a unified body, would be in better shape than under Trump. Because if Trump were to win, there'd be sort of a realignment, I think, necessarily. So I think you'd have like the splinter group of, I don't know, maybe 20 or 30% of Republicans in Congress banded together to be the never Trump true conservative wing. So it would become like a semi-official anti-Trump wing of the party. But whereas under Hillary, they could be totally unified.
Right. No, I agree about that. You would expect them to be totally unified because opposition is unifying. We don't know. But if Trump is elected, if he's utterly idiosyncratic, as he certainly has a good track record being utterly idiosyncratic, then he may push back in ways we can't even predict against Ryan and McConnell and the congressional party. And that may cause lots of splits. But if he just kind of goes along with whatever, Ryan budget and, block granting Medicaid and all, upward redistribution, increasing the Pentagon spending, whatever it is, whatever the standard GOP fiscal policies are, then I think he'll be. In other words, if he's more of a typical Republican president than anybody's really expecting, because he's so sui generis, then the party will be more unified too than we might expect. But we don't know.
My sense is that he would not be an ordinary Republican president. Number one, just in terms of he's been personally betrayed, or he perceives himself as being personally betrayed by Paul Ryan. So I think he's going to try to exact revenge on Paul Ryan somehow, were he to win.
Could be.
And no, I don't think and Trump has been clear that he's not for privatizing Social Security. He's not for reforming Medicaid or Medicare. That's been constant throughout the primaries and the general election. Right. So he hasn't moved from that point. Who knows? He could just forfeit everything that he said thus far and get on board with that agenda, the Paul Ryan agenda. But I don't see that happening. And I actually wrote a Medium post a couple, what was it, Sunday now, just kind of sussing out, could Trump hypothetically work with the left in any sense? Trump has been very stridently in favor of infrastructure spending.
Infrastructure, that's the one thing.
So let's say Trump could want a huge infrastructure spending bill, and he could get a huge, he can get a critical mass of Democrats and Republicans to support that.
I'm not sure if he could get the Republicans because Ryan's already saying he doesn't want a bunch of infrastructure, and so are the rest. But anyway, this is for another time. I'm actually getting this signal here that my battery's about to die, and that would be
okay. Yeah. We can go for a while.
That's a way to end it. A high quality production like this. If I just black
Indeed. All right. Well, farewell to our viewers, and maybe we can do it again sometime.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks a lot, Michael. I appreciate it. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye-bye.